What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this podcast. We help founders and CEOs turn their startups into unicorns by introducing them to CROs and VPs of sales with track records of generating revenue, building teams, and scaling growth. And you'll find out shortly that my guest is certainly the epitome of that. This podcast is also now being sponsored by Allego. For all you sales leaders out there, have you ever absolutely nailed a sales training or had a rep who killed a presentation that you wished you recorded to be seen later by new hires or other members of the team? Well, that's just one of the things that Allego can do. Not only does it allow you to record the best content for practice collaboration and feedback, but it gives you a way to organize all of your best content in one place so it's easily accessible to help improve sales performance for everyone. Please email me, web with two B's, at thejdavidgroup.com so I can personally introduce you to someone that will take great care of you. Now, for the star of the show, my guest today is Ryan Burke, who is making his second appearance now on the Overquota podcast. He is the Chief Revenue Officer at Qatalog, which has developed a virtual workspace that brings together disparate SaaS tools to help teams function better. Prior to joining Qatalog, he was the SVP of International Sales at InVisionApp, where he helped scale it from 30 people to over 850 people, which again is the definition of going from a startup to unicorn. The first time Ryan was on to talk about how to build and effectively manage fully distributed teams, which was relevant back when we published the episode back in June, although I think we maybe recorded it sometime in April or May of 2020. But nevertheless, it was relevant then, and it certainly is relevant now. So go check it out when you have time. It's episode number 19. Ryan, welcome back to Over Quota.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate you having me back.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you back. And when I first reached out to you to be a guest on Over Quota, for all of you who are listening and maybe listened to episode number 19, I've told Ryan I wasn't sure which way to go with the episode because I had watched some presentations that he'd given on remote working and then also scaling. But when I reached out to him, I think it was like probably April, maybe March or April of 2020 when everybody was remote. And I figured that was going to be an optimal time to talk about it, to share with people how he and his team built the team over that there at InVisionApp, fully distributed, or as you called it in the podcast on that episode, I think you called it a fully, not even fully remote, but work from anywhere culture. And so today, I wanted to have him back on to talk about scale, because as we start to recognize that we are in a new normal and companies still need to grow and companies still need to and desire to scale and to become the next unicorn, your knowledge, Ryan, was certainly useful. So let's just start with Qatalog for a moment, and then we'll go back to talk about scaling. So tell us a little bit about Qatalog and why you decided to join Qatalog.
Yeah, definitely. So I appreciate it. And like you said, I spent 5.5 years at InVision and started as the head of sales and customer success, built up that team, and then moved over to London and built out the international business. And as we talked about in the last time, InVision was one of the largest fully remote companies in the world prior to the whole COVID situation. And so when I was looking for a new opportunity, when I left InVision, obviously had an affinity to the remote and distributed, work style. And I wanted to find technologies and businesses that maybe were getting some tailwinds from the distributed movement, but, we're building sustainable long-term businesses. And so, one of the things that I felt very acutely at InVision with 800 people from all over the world is just, there are so many different tools that we're using. And, this whole shift to the distributed workforce, like there's a million great tools out there now. And there's just been this explosion of awesome SaaS tools to help you manage. And the goal was to make it so you can collaborate and be more productive. But honestly, it feels like it's done a little the opposite. It's created more noise. It's created a little bit more chaos. And so we felt that at InVision, where we had so many different tools and so many different teams. And so when I first got introduced to Tarek, the CEO, the founder of Qatalog, it just really struck a chord where the power of taking all of these great tools that you're using and centralizing them into, a centralized work hub. And so that having that connective tissue where you can search across all of your people, teams, and your projects, you can manage all of your workflows, your goals, your updates, all of that from one central place, even if you're using Asana, Slack, Google, Salesforce, whatever,
Mm.
it connects all of those. And so I got really inspired by the vision, um, and made the leap. So I joined 4 months ago. We've raised $18 million total, 15 million Series A in the fall, just getting the product out to market. So it's early. It's definitely early. But every day that I'm, at Qatalog and the team that we have, just more optimistic. And, even with Qatalog being as early as it is from a product perspective, like we use it every day internally. And just the power of having easy access to everything has been incredibly powerful.
Describe really early to me. And
Yeah.
when you look at catalog, how far out are you looking in terms of what your vision is? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is that too long? Is that too short? Give me a sense of how you're thinking at this point.
Yeah, I mean it's early. I mean it's early in the fact that I came on board as a chief revenue officer and the product wasn't live yet. So
Hmm.
managing zero revenue. And But I think one of the things around how we're setting it up, even hiring, people like myself and more experienced people, like the foundation is being set up to scale pretty quickly. It's a very professional team and process for the stage that we're at. We're about, over 30 people now. I joined 4 months ago. I think I was employee 14. But the product is tight and the processes internally are tight. And so now that we're getting the product out into the market and we're starting to get some feedback, we've got a lot of those pieces that are going to enable us to scale pretty quickly. So in your question around your time horizon, I mean, we're going to, push pretty aggressively this year, based on customer feedback. Obviously, we'll figure out the best areas to scale. But we're already getting incredible touch points from, the early customers. We had over 3,000 people that were asking for early access. And so we are primed to scale pretty aggressively this year.
Um, what is the go-to market strategy there? And the 3,000 people that you just alluded to,
Yep.
as it pertains to early access, tell me about that. In other words, how did you get them on some sort of a list to begin with?
Sure. I mean, some of it was from, we had the TechCrunch article. We've had some content out there. I mean, whether or not catalog is ultimately the solution, the pain points that we're addressing in terms of the silos of information across these distributed teams, access to the most up-to-date versions, everybody has those pain points. There's not one person I talk to that isn't struggling a little bit with some of those pain points. And so word of mouth has been big. We've done a little bit of advertising, but been pretty minimal in that. So it's been incredibly exciting to see some of these companies coming in, waiting for the early access.
So let's talk about what you mentioned regarding the scale, the three F's
Yep.
when it comes to scaling, and then how it pertains to how you're thinking about growing the team here moving forward. So tell me what the three F's are, and then we'll drill down a little bit deeper into them.
Yeah, and the three F's are just sort of a framework that I put together in terms of hiring and scaling your team. And sort of the first five is the first one, and sort of setting that foundation, get those people in first. And then the second is the foundation from more of a structure and process standpoint. And the third is the future. And so I'm definitely in the first category right now. And the biggest thing right now is getting the right team in place. And I think that at this stage, it's really important to get the right people who aren't even necessarily salespeople. I mean, the reality is you need folks right now that have a very high product acumen and operational acumen, where they're going to be able to demo the product. They're going to be able to handle questions and technical inquiries, but they're also there to build, right? Getting people at this stage is, you got to make sure you're hiring people that have the right motivation for the stage that you're at. And so one of those motivations is for salespeople is high commissions. And the reality is at this stage, that's not a fit for what we're doing, right? And so if people want to go and make really big commissions, go to the Salesforces and the Oracles of the world. But if you want to come in and have an impact and put your stamp on the foundation of building a go-to-market for a really interesting SaaS opportunity, that's what we're hiring for now. So I think it's important for companies to crystallize the story on the stage that you're at, identifying the traits that for the people that would fit that stage, and then hiring for those. And that's why I think things like product managers are kind of good salespeople now, or folks with a more strategic or operational background. And that's really important inside of that first 5.
How much do you take into consideration the sales motion or the sales process, right? In other words, with Qatalog, is it, and maybe even with InVisionApp, was it product-led growth? In other words, was it a free trial, premium? Because I'm thinking about in terms of the particular set of skills that the first 5 quote unquote sales people need to have, whether it's an outbound model, inbound. Tell me a little bit about that and how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, InVision was very much a bottoms up motion. You had a free product and people were exposed to that. And then when we stratified up the enterprise is when I came on to help build that. And Qatalog's fairly similar in the fact that you think about a bottoms up motion that you typically sort of nail that individual use case, and then you move to a team use case, and then you sort of evolve to the organizational one. Qatalog's a little different in the fact that, it's inherently a platform, a tool to help you collaborate and communicate. So the more people, the more value you're going to extract from it. And, but having a free product similar to an InVision, people will organically have some exposure to the product. So then the sales motion becomes a little bit different. If they are exposed to the free product, it's more about how do you communicate and position the value as you scale and get more people in. And that's a little bit of a different story than just selling, the core, features of a particular product.
What are those early conversations? How do they need to be conducted? What are your early hires discussing with the new customers?
Yeah, so to speak? I mean, the biggest thing for us, and any company at this stage, is feedback. Customer feedback, and everybody says, "Oh, you got to listen to customers and whatnot." But there has to be discipline around it, and there's got to be structure around that. And so, the salespeople, the go-to-market team, they're the conduit to the market and the customers. And so making sure that everything they're doing is oriented around collecting as much feedback as possible, but also putting that in a format that the rest of the team can use. And so, at Qatalog, it's great because the whole company is oriented around this theme of feedback. And we've got all these different tools, and we've got processes set up to make sure that we're capturing the feedback in an actionable way. So in terms of the early, go-to-market folks, like that has to be, the number one focus. And even for us, we're so early in the process right now that I don't want to goal them and comp them just on revenue. And so I've actually created sort of an MBO structure for the early folks, and getting feedback from a set number of customers is one of the things I'll pay the team on. And I think that's important when you're starting out and building the scale, is even things like comp and incentives, making sure that you're, understanding what are the specific needs from the business, and maybe revenue is that. But for somebody at our stage, like feedback is just as important. And so designing those initial incentives and compensation structures around the business metrics is really important.
How do you know which feedback to prioritize and to say, okay, this is what we should take from this, and now we're going to take an action to it, versus some of the other feedback is like, okay, that's good feedback, but we're going to ignore that because that's, how do you prioritize that stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, at this point, we want the feedback to be, we want the product is somewhat intentionally broad. And we're going to be using that feedback to further hone our focus moving forward. And, you know, some of the feedback, like we're in, this category creation play, and similar to Envision, where early on it was, creating a category around design within the business context. And we're in a similar place. Like people are changing the way they're fundamentally working. And so a lot of the feedback that we want right now is oriented around the pain points that they have. How are those pain points playing out specifically in terms of maybe where it's moving the needle internally? Is it time saved? Is it, ramp time for new employees? And understanding some of those levers on, maybe the financial or business impact of the issues that they're facing. We also want to categorize the feedback by persona, right? I mean, the beauty of something like Catalog right now is every time I talk to somebody who sits in a different part of the organization, they're seeing different use cases, which is great. But you've also got to figure out, where we're going to focus from an entry point standpoint when we go more aggressively on the go-to-market side. And so figuring out the feedback by companies, by personas, the use cases, and then the financial and business impact of those use cases.
What about like being able to support the initiatives that the feedback is bringing to you? In other words, if you're moving in one direction and you realize that you should start moving in a different direction based on the feedback that you're giving, how do you, as it pertains, I guess, to people that you're hiring, support sales so there aren't any bottlenecks in delivering the product in a seamless way so that the customers are getting the right onboarding experience and those types of things? Like how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, we're in the stage right now where all feedback is good feedback.
Mm-hmm.
As you start to mature, you need to make sure that the feedback is tied to a specific, user or buyer behavior. And what I mean by that, like, even at InVision, everybody, when we were international at first, we'd get all this feedback. Oh, we need to have local servers in Europe. We need to have local servers in Europe, But the reality was, once you actually dug a little bit deeper into that feedback, we weren't losing deals. People really didn't need it. It was more of a kind of a marketing and business request than it was a legal requirement. And so making sure that especially as you mature, you're tying that feedback to, the deals, the specific impact on the deals, like that's really important as well. And, the other thing about feedback is you want to make sure that the customers feel like they're being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so the feedback should be two-way, right? And so, ingesting that feedback in a way that the product engineering teams can prioritize, but then also relaying back. So, customers don't feel like their voice is just going into the ether, or their feedback is just getting lost somewhere. You've got to make sure that you're taking that feedback and you're communicating something back to the market that says, hey, you know what, that's interesting. This is what we're doing either on the roadmap, or this is the way we're thinking about it, or this is why we're not doing that. Mm-hmm. And making sure that you're giving letting those people feel like they have a voice internally in the company. And that's really important to build sort of those, authentic and trusting relationships early on.
What about internally sharing that feedback and making sure that you can take action on the feedback in a meaningful way, like operationalizing it? I know that you talked about in the past in terms of, for instance, just even like storing the information and the feedback that you're getting somewhere so that it's not siloed, where people can actually access it and use it. Like, how do you tell me about that?
Yeah. There's a few things. I think one, we're categorizing the feedback based on specific features and then tying it to specific use cases. There's other things that we need to do to, align feedback from, what we're hearing in sales conversations to what you're seeing in the data. Mm-hmm. And that's why something like, you think about your initial tool sets, even as a go-to-market team, one of the biggest things you need is that product usage, especially if there's the free product, or such a wealth of information. And even doing things like, reconciling what ads are people responding to? What are they responding to in the demos? What's the heat map of where they're going in your website? But then tying that to what they're actually doing in the product. and figuring out if that's aligned, or if there's maybe some disjointment there, and really tying it to the actual usage that you're seeing. And I think the biggest thing of feedback right now at this stage is finding those little points of friction, those little points of friction every step of the way,
Mm.
whether it's getting people to take a meeting, or whether it's getting them to get into the product, or it's getting them to invite somebody else to their product. And, early stage, you've got to constantly be collectively as a company identifying all of those friction points, isolate them, and then figure out how to remove them. And you can go through things like, you know, if price, give them a free trial, extend the free trial. Just making sure if credibility's a friction point, coming up with some references, figuring out all of those little different pieces of friction and then addressing them. And I think that's the biggest thing for the company right now, is figuring out all those different points of why people aren't using some part of the product. That'll change as you move into the enterprise, and then security will become a friction point, legal will become a friction point, and those friction points will change, as you mature as an organization and move into larger enterprise deals. And so, I think just figuring out those little triggers of one, finding the friction, and two, finding those triggers that kind of unlock people, right? And so, figuring out whatever you call it, the atomic use case that says, we know if when people come on board, if they do these 3 actions, integrate with these 2 tools, boom, this is going to be a long-lasting customer. So figuring out what those signals are early on for that atomic use case that'll allow you to, pour more fuel onto that.
And obviously, as it pertains to hiring the first 5, those conversations that they're having, to your point, are obviously super important, because without the feedback that they're getting from these early customers, and without them sharing this feedback, then clearly none of this that you're saying can happen, right? So it all starts with them, right? For sure. What about so you have the first 5, they need to talk to customers and to share the feedback from a trait perspective. Like what other, I'm hearing and listening to
Yeah.
this, definitely intellectual curiosity has to be there, because they got to be able to dig deep into
Yeah.
the challenges and those types of things. What are some of the other traits that are going to be needed and inherent in those folks, especially since they're not necessarily classical salespeople?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think, there's a few. I think resilience is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I just think resilience, I mean, in early stage companies, there's going to be challenges internally and externally, and you're going to get your nose bloody. And so figuring out the level of resilience that folks have, testing them on, maybe difficult situations they've been in the past, and how do they overcome it, or what do they learn from it, or people that were, you know, at startups that ran out of money or failed, like those are really good candidates for early stage. Like they understand that resilience is really important. I think that coachability is really interesting, and focus on self-development, especially in the distributed world that we live in now. You need people that are sort of inherently programmed to focus on bettering themselves. What are they doing to improve themselves personally and professionally? Like just figuring out, like, are these people truly motivated to develop their skills? And so testing them on that. I think proactivity, especially in a remote world, you need people that are collaborative and they're proactive in terms of searching out answers. And so those are probably some of the biggest traits. But I think the traits are important, as well as the motivations, like understanding why people want to work at the company that you're hiring for, and understanding what their motivations are personally. Because again, if cash is the motivation, great, but that's probably not great for a salesperson at a really early stage company. And so understanding people's specific motivations, and I think one of the biggest things in the hiring process at this stage, and for any early stage company, is just being transparent, and being transparent about the worst thing you can do is hire somebody and have them come on board and have the expectations be vastly different than they had during the interview process. I mean, when I first interviewed with Clark Wahlberg, the founder, CEO of InVision, I remember I went down to New York and met with him, and he started off and he said, "All right, I'm going to spend 2 hours telling you why this is not the right job for you." And we went through everything, all of the issues and different problems and all of the competitors and all of this, and he just painted such a picture. Obviously, it was still extremely compelling, but I appreciated the transparency. But also, when I started, like, there was nothing I didn't know. And so I think just being transparent with people around, where you are from a product, market, competitive standpoint, up front in the process is really important. And that'll also help you gauge their motivations if people are still willing to come in with all of the warts that maybe that you highlight, that is the potentially the right profile.
You mentioned resilience, but as I look at your experience and your profile, I'm thinking to myself, well, where did he stub his toe? Like, he just completely, you got the InVisionApp and killed it. And, you're sitting on, you're advising some companies. It seems like from the outside looking in, I'm like, wow, this guy Ryan seems like anything he touches, it turns to gold or platinum. So, like, give me, where's the wall in your story?
Yeah, no, we might need episode 3 to go through all of this. I mean, there's a few. I mean, even at InVision was an incredible journey, but there were some real challenges. And as we moved into the enterprise, the competitive context became a lot more interesting and threatening. And we had some challenges on pricing. We had some challenges on how we went to market. We had some challenges internally on rules of engagement. And there were a lot of bumps. There. At one point, InVision was clearly the market leader, and that's not the case anymore. And so, there was a totally different phase in the last couple of years that I was there than the first 3 years. That was interesting. Prior to InVision, I did a short stint in the social advertising space, which, was a challenge overall. I mean, understanding, being in social advertising with obviously the Facebooks of the world sort of dominating everything. And there was just challenges culturally there and product market fit. And so that was definitely a learning experience, we'll just say as well.
So that's interesting. So let me ask you this then. How do you, when you're going through that, right? Because I think it would be interesting for people to hear that are either struggling now, have struggled, trying to get back onto their footing. Maybe they're building a company right now and they're running into some challenges. How do you, Ryan Burke, think through those challenges, prioritize what needs to be done, not next month, but literally now, in order to change the path that you're on?
Yeah, in terms of now at Qatalog, or in terms of like that new opportunity, or
just let's put it this way: moving through the challenges that you had in the past, like at InVisionApp, where it wasn't, there were some challenges with the go-to-market, with the pricing, and those types of things. Like, how did you strategically think about, okay, this is a way forward? And I'm sure you collaborated with others, but then now, I guess, if you look at Qatalog, what have you learned through those moments that you can hopefully will prevent you from some of those things that you went through?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things that's really important when you go through these periods of turbulence is making sure that you have that North Star, and making sure that everybody's bought into that. Like, it can't just be something that, the CEO or somebody says once a quarter. It's got to be a living and breathing part of, the organization, whether you call it the mission or whatnot. Something that galvanizes the team to get through that period. And even in InVision, when we were going through some of the challenging, periods, that was a different, employee retention was an issue. But one of the things that was compelling is anybody can be at a company and do well when everything's going great. But it's another part of your career story and your own personal development if you're able to manage through those periods of turbulence. And so understanding that and communicating that and talking about the lessons learned when you're going through these turbulent periods, like that's a much more impressive part of somebody's story. And so I think those are some of the things that you've got to keep in mind as you're managing um, through these periods. And yeah, at Catalog, understand, some of the mistakes that I made and we all made at InVision is helping to figure out how to prioritize. And, even at at InVision, we had these company values and we sort of managed to them. At Catalog, we've got a lot of, Amazon lineage of the company, and we have these tenants. And so these tenants for every project, and they're great. There's like just a discipline and rigor that you've got to have for everyone. So every project you do, you're coming up with these, whatever, 4 to 5 tenants. There's sort of these, behavioral parameters or decision-making guidelines in the absence of leadership. And then you've got the execution milestones and the KPIs. And, for instance, on the feedback, one of the tenets right now for our organization, go-to-market, is feedback over revenue. And it'll change. And the tenants are successful when they have tension. They have to be doing something almost at the expense of something else. And so creating that natural tension is what makes an effective tenant. And so just having a little bit more discipline and rigor in some of these projects I think is really helping to avoid some of the mistakes that we made in the past.
Doing something at the I'm sorry, restate that again. The tension is doing something at the expense of something else. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So again, feedback over revenue is one of our tenets.
Got it. Yes.
So if anybody on the go-to-market team is talking to a customer and, they're in a particular situation and they're trying to figure out what to do, those tenants should help guide them and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to get as much feedback from this customer as possible, even if I have to extend the free trial, give them the product free, because I know right now that feedback is a bigger priority to the go-to-market team and the overall organization. And so those types of tension in those tenants are what make them effective.
And that's why you mentioned earlier in making decisions or something to the effect of the absence of leadership, because that person who is having that conversation or is in the trenches, so to speak, they can have the courage of their conviction to say, like, okay, like, the North Star is, or the tenant is, that feedback over revenue is important, and this is what Ryan would want me to do in this particular moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Oh, I can see how that. Yeah, I can see how that works, and it keeps everything sort of cross-functionally coherent, I guess, or cohesive, right? So everybody's sort of rowing in the right direction, even though everybody's doing different things, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's talk about the second F, which is foundation.
Yeah, and this is once you've got some data points from the initial team that you've brought on, you got the feedback, and this is where you start to build the kind of the foundation from a tools perspective. Maybe you're hiring your first level of managers. You're bringing on operations. Operations is one of those things where I feel like sometimes companies can wait too long to hire operations. And operations, I waited too long at InVision. I had like I don't know, 7-8 person team. And I was like, it's probably too early. Next thing you know, I had a 25 person team. And I was like, this is a little too late, because that data is so important in terms of how you're building. That's why I think things like operations are really important to bring on a little bit earlier as you're building that foundation. Hiring managers. One of the things that we did interesting at InVision was, we defined our target persona, who was the designer, and then we hired one, and for the sales team. And so instead of hiring a solutions engineer, sales engineer, whatever you call it, we said, let's just hire a designer for our team. And they know the customer, they know all of the day-to-day, challenges that designers are facing. And so, again, we figured out our target persona and we hired them and had that person sitting on the sales team. And then that was a really interesting part of, that foundation where we just had real time access to the pain points of the target persona and able to build the empathy and the positioning and all of that, which was really effective.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I never heard of that, and I bet not a lot of people have to actually hire the persona of the person that you're, the folks that you're targeting. It's amazing. What that's
Yeah, and the other thing I would just say about the foundation is, once you start to get some of the data, from the earlier stages, that's when you can start to build out things like, the leading indicators. And you talked about this a little bit on the remote one, but it's as important to be measuring, if not more important, to be measuring the behaviors and activities as it is the results.
mhm.
And so making sure that people know what are the activities that they should be doing and managing the team to them, holding them accountable to them. You don't have to police them, and you don't have to, you know, boards and all of the analytics to beat people up, but using those as opportunities to identify areas of coaching. um, but it's just really important because, especially in an earlier stage company, sometimes the results can be impacted by, external forces and, competitors, all these different things. um, but you can control the behaviors, how people are acting, are they living up to the values, are they, managing to the tenants, but more importantly, are the activities, are they doing the right things? And, we probably did a little bit, when we introduced these at InVision, we didn't do the best job because we sort of threw a bunch of activities out at people. We said, all right, here's your number at the end of the year, and work back from that. Say, what are all the things that you need to do? How many calls, how many meetings, how many opportunities of this stage? Boom, 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 boom. And everybody sort of freaked out. It's like, oh, micromanage. And so we boiled it back and we said, all right, listen, we're just going to measure meetings, customer meetings. How many meetings are you having a week? Because you got to do the prospecting to get the meetings. And if you have the meetings, it'll lead to the pipeline. And so we simplified it, and you can iterate on those, but I would figure out what that one maybe metric is that you feel like is the best indicator, and, start to manage to that. And so I think in this foundational stage, making sure that you've got those leading indicators and those activities both for your ICs, but as you build out the management team too, having those leading indicators for managers. How many coaching conversations are you having a week? How many career development conversations are you going to have a quarter? And having the managers have them, shows a level of accountability to the rest of the organization, that it's not like, all right, we're just going to manage the ICs on these things. Everybody's held accountable, and you published them, and everybody knew um, what people were held accountable to. And so I think that level of transparency and ownership goes a long way.
Let me go back to the operations piece for a mention for a minute when you said you hired operations too, waited too long to hire operations there.
Yeah.
What was breaking? Like what was missing during that period of time? You're like, oh shit, like I should have hired an operations person like a year ago or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them would be exactly the leading indicators and just figuring out, what are the activities that are going to drive segmentation as well. I mean, in early stage, you don't need to segment too much. You want to keep it intentionally broad. You want to give free rein a little bit to the go-to-market folks, and then you can distill down the segmentation. But that's where I think you're going to want an operations person to come in, look at the data in terms of the personas, the types of companies, the regions, what verticals, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can start to build out the stratification of your team. All right, do we need an SMB team? Do we want an enterprise team? Do we want to layer on, a strategic named account team and territories and all of those things? That's where you really, want the operational firepower. And again, you don't have to segment too early, but once you get to that point, when you have enough data, you're going to want an operations person to help create that.
I don't know if we should get into the third F now because, and you can tell me, I guess, based on my question I'm about to ask you, but like, when is it time to really, um, I guess, scale, if you will? In other words, to say like, okay, now we know nothing's going to break, or maybe that's a loaded statement, I guess, or assumptive, but we're feeling pretty good right now. Now it's time to throw fuel on the fire, so to speak, and really let this thing off? Like, where is that point? Where's that inflection point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I think one, when you're doing a more bottoms up sales motion, it's much more of a product based motion.
Mm.
And as you start to scale and move into the enterprise, then it becomes a value based motion. So once you understand those value points, like exactly like how you're moving the needle internally at these companies, like that's a signal for when you're ready to unleash a little bit. I think that there's value in something we did effectively in InVision. There's value in, early on, you've got to get those anchor customers, get those anchor customers who, maybe you go out, whatever your product is, you find who are the cool kids on the block and do everything you can to remove the friction to get them in their hands on the product, because you can then also benefit from leveraging the network effect of the fact that you're using them. And so I think finding those anchor customers, building some of those early champion relationships, people that are, gonna, suffer through some of the early, turbulence in the product or whatever it is. And you do that by adding value to them, even if it's outside of the product, and so the go-to-market team, I always talk, you add value at every step. And it doesn't have to be value just specific to the features of the usage of our product, understanding them as a persona and being able to understand the pain points and helping to add value to them, whether it's referring other candidates, interesting pieces of content, like all of these different things you should be using as tools to create value with these folks that'll build these long-lasting champion relationships. And so then once you have sort of a core set of anchor customers, you've got some champions, and then you've got the you got the champions that'll give you the signals, and then you have the value points as well. That's when those are the signals to go ahead and pour fuel.
Are value points at the point, like the reason why customers are buying, or are they different or is that different when you say value point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of the value that they're getting. It's either the value that is the pain that they're feeling right now, and then how that's addressed through the product. Because you think about it, when you move to an enterprise sale, inevitably somebody you're talking to is going to have to sell that internally. And so if they go internally, and you always have to ask that question up front, hey, if things go well, what would the process look like for you to deploy this type of product at scale? Well, we've got to build a business case, and we've got to go and, present that to the procurement team or the, CTO or whoever it is. And so understanding like what's involved in that. Hey, well, the last time you guys rolled out a product, what did that look like? Hey, when you guys rolled out Slack, what did that process look like? Well, we need to get, the time saved. We need to bum. And then you start to get those data points. And then those are the types of points that you need to start to, build your value case around. And, the reality is you don't need an ROI calculator, all of those things. Like, people know their numbers better than you do. You just need something that's going to start that conversation. And so whether it's a third party, reference point or some other content, you just need something to start the conversation around how they're defining value in the particular, environment of your, maybe of your tool.
What about as it pertains to scaling the data that's in Salesforce that says, okay, like these opportunities have advanced in the pipeline. Here are the meetings here are the number of meetings that we need to close, or even things like customer acquisition costs and those types of things. Like, are those other indicators to say, here's where we're tracking, and now if we keep these numbers as they are or improve them, this is also this is also an indicator for us to really light it on fire, so to speak?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the most important ones is, those expansion metrics, and understanding how quickly product usage and ultimately licensing grows post sale, because that's going to really dictate what your front end sales motion should look like as well. are you better off just getting the logo on board because you know it's going to scale, or let's get as much as we need to up front
Hmm.
because it's probably not going to grow until renewal time. And
Right.
so understanding some of the metrics post sale is really important to help you build out, your pre-sales motion, your comp plans, your rules of engagement, territories, all of that
Hmm.
is really important. But all that data in Salesforce. I mean, it's still early stage. Probably the biggest data point in Salesforce is still going to be closed lost reason. You know,
Yep.
why are people who are exposed to your product not moving forward with it?
Hmm.
Was it a competitor? Was it price? Was it this feature? And that's the type of thing. And so as a sales leader, it's sort of on you to make sure that, the sales team is incentivized to be putting in that data. A lot of times salespeople are like, oh, I lost that deal. I don't want to share too much. We used to do things like, face plant of the month, or, we'd celebrate a loss every month or whatever it was. And so, you sort of reward that behavior and build a little bit of culture around it that says, hey, you know what, we welcome that.
Hmm.
Go out there and try to do things. And if it doesn't work, that's awesome. But let's share it with the team. Don't be afraid why we lost the deal, and let's dissect it and go through it. And what can we learn as a sales team? What can we learn as a product team? And so creating a culture that sort of celebrates losses,
Hmm.
I think is really important as well.
Interesting. Where are those first five now at this point in the process, right? In other words, have you changed at this point? You've changed the persona because it's more of maybe more friction in the sales process. You're going up market. Like what? Tell me about how that persona has shifted.
In terms of where we are at catalog.
Yeah, or just where it will be, right? In other words, you have the first five. This is where we were, whether like you were at Envision, and then
Yeah.
how did you move it, and then how you're thinking about that at Catalog as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, and Envision, the first five I hired were they all moved into leadership roles and different parts of the organization. They were all promoted because they were the right people for the right time. And I feel like
Hmm.
we're doing something similar at Catalog right now across the board, not even, just the go-to-market team, but finding people that, understand where we're at, but they want to come in and build.
Hmm.
For them, the career development part of the story is their biggest motivating factor. And so I think we're still trying to figure out, exactly where those people go on the go-to-market team. But for the next 6 months, like whatever you're called, customer success, sales, support, the lines are all pretty blurred.
Right.
Talk to customers, get the feedback, you know, build new pipeline, create new opportunities, ask for referrals, build long-lasting champion relationships. Like that's pretty consistent regardless of, what it says on LinkedIn. And so knowing, hiring people that understand that as well.
Hmm.
And, I think that's a little bit of the benefit too when you hire these first five is you can come in now as a salesperson, CSM, or whatever it is. But at this stage, you touch so many different parts of the business that maybe in 2 years you want to move into product or you want to move in, the marketing team.
Hmm.
Great. But it gives you the exposure to see all the different parts of the business, which I think is really beneficial and part of the story that you can tell as you're trying to recruit these people.
We're at the last F, and I realize we're coming
Sure.
at the top of the hour here, but tell us about the last F. What's that?
The last step is the future, and that's as you're starting to you've got sort of the data points in terms of what works, and now you're moving into more of the enterprise. And so again, you're reassessing the friction points as you've moved up, and this is where it becomes much more of a value-based motion, and that's why you've got to change then again the profile of the people you hire,
Hmm.
where it's less about the operations and it's more about storytelling,
Hmm.
finding people that are really good storytellers. Like that's how you're going to, build the future of the organization from there. And so I think it's just the next iteration. You've got the data, you've got the product market, you've got some anchor customers, you've got the leading indicators. And so now you know how to scale, and now you're scaling around selling to value and then building the team and the profiles around that.
And I heard you had mentioned at some point previously that friction will occur again, and you've got to constantly sort of remove friction. Are you
Yeah.
talking specifically in the sales process or everywhere? Tell me about that.
I think it's a little bit everywhere, but again, as you move into the later stages, people don't care about what your product does.
Hmm.
They care about, at that stage, they care about, what are the benefits of the product, and what are some examples of how other companies similar to them have realized those benefits.
Hmm.
And so that's just a little bit of a different motion, where it's less about selling the product and it's more about telling the story, painting a little bit of the before picture. Here's a world, without this, and here's the world where you could go, and here's what that looks like, including what those benefits are. And so I think it's just, along the lines of the evolution from a product-based sales motion or a feature-based sales motion to a value-based one.
And that's why those anchor customers are so important, right? Because those are where the stories and real true testimonials are going to come out.
Exactly. And so a demo should never be, even one of our tenets is, we educate, we don't sell.
Mm.
And, don't talk about a particular feature, talk about how another company that they can associate with, use that to affect some particular change, internally at their organization. And so, with any of the demos or decks or any of that stuff, it's less about the features and it's more about all of those stories. And, salespeople should have, 5 to 10 of those stories for every one of those features or any one of those part of the products. Should be able to just bang out those stories, because that's what's going to get people excited.
That's right. And that's where marketing comes in too, to help them tell those stories, for
Exactly.
sure. Well, tell me, what does Catalog need right now in terms of hires? Let's give you a chance to tell my
Yeah.
audience who you need and how to get.
Yeah. I mean, we're hiring across the board, engineers. We're a fully remote company. It's, headquartered in London. I'm obviously in the States, but it's fully remote. Hiring folks on the go-to-market side, hiring folks on the support side. It's, looking back at InVision, when I say, oh, I was there for 5.5 years, and those early days, as most people would say, those were the most fun. It's tough, it's turbulent, all of that. That's the stage that we're in. And it's a really good time to be joining a company like Catalog, because, there's a lot we need to figure out, but, the pain points in the industry are there clearly in the market. And what we're building is extremely compelling. And again, for me, the biggest thing is the fact that we use the product every day,
Mm.
and it's changed the way that I work every day. And the fact that I'm no longer having to say, oh, shoot, was that document in Google Doc? Did somebody post that in Slack? Hey, what's the status in that project? I know somebody was managing it in Asana. It doesn't matter. It's like one click. I find anything I want. I get the status and anything I want, and I can communicate with the right person about it. And so it's completely changed the way that we've operated the business internally, which to me is, the most exciting thing, because we're just, hungry to get that message out there, and we're in the early stages, and we want those folks that want to be part of, category creation. And that's a fun place to be. It's daunting and intimidating, because people want to kind of put you in a box whenever you talk to them. And the fact that we're going out there and helping to establish that new box, that's the type of environment that gets my juices flowing. So that's why, we're hiring across the board.
It's interesting too when you were talking about looking for good storytellers. That's what you just gave is your own testimonial from using your own product. And as you were saying that, you're hitting all the pains that even I have with my own little small business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, it's like, yeah, he's right.
Exactly. It's free for up to 10 customers. Yeah, I'll give you an onboarding anytime you want.
All right, I'm gonna take you up on it for real.
Yeah, I'd love to get your feedback.
For sure. Do we have time for? And I'm not sure if I had it when the last time I interviewed you, that I'm
Sure.
called the Rapid Fire 5, or ask you questions. You give me 5 answers that are pretty simple.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Oh, hold on. I gotta look at them here. All right. First question. Do you have a morning routine? If so,
I do. Can you hear me? I was cutting out for a second. Let me shut some down.
I got you.
All right, cool. I've gotten to become a little bit more of a creature of habit. I had an executive coach maybe a year and a half ago that I hired with my own money.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into the habit of doing a daily journal. And so, it's one of the typical sort of gratitude journals. And I've just got a Google Doc where I wake up in the morning, I check my Boston College sports, and then I go and I write my daily journal, a couple things that I'm grateful for, some positive feedback, and that's really been changed. I feel like it's changed my mindset. I try to do a little bit of exercise, once a morning, daily journal. I've got a couple books I try to read, maybe one chapter a morning as well, and that's how I kick off the day.
What are you most excited about now, personally and professionally?
I think probably, I mean, what we're doing at Qatalog at the stage we're at, I was pretty nervous about going into an earlier stage company. And I'm having to do a lot of the things that, maybe I hadn't done a lot of at InVision because we had a much bigger team. I was defining Salesforce stages a couple months ago and getting into the nitty gritty. And, at first I was pretty, intimidated by getting back into it. But it's been very rewarding. And so I've been, excited about sharpening my skills in a lot of these areas. And then, just the way that we're working internally at Qatalog has been a really big learning experience for me. I feel like I'm learning some new skills and these tenants and these other things that we're doing. So I'm just really excited about it. And then, just the fact that we're in this blank canvas of new category is a lot of fun. And so that's probably what I'm most excited about right now.
What about personally?
Personally, I'm excited to get my kids out of the damn house and going back to school. It'll be a full year in March since they've set foot in a school. And excited about hopefully traveling soon. We booked some time in South Carolina in April. But now it's all good.
Awesome. What do you want to get better at right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Personally, I need to get in better shape. Moving back from Europe, put on a few pounds, had to put the UK skinny jeans away. But professionally, the operational side and sort of at this stage, like building out some of the, data-driven modeling for how I think we need to scale this is an area that I want to continue to focus on. Because it's all new. We don't have a lot of data right now, but that's probably professionally is one area. Coaching, like I feel like I've always been a really good team builder, but I also want to get better at helping folks develop and giving them specific pieces of feedback that they can learn from as well.
Do you still have your executive coach, by the way?
I don't. I'm still in touch with her. She's great. But I'm not. We did like a 6-month program that was awesome.
Got it. Okay. What keeps you motivated?
Yeah, I'm pretty competitive. And I'm really motivated. Even the space that we're in, it feels like there's a lot of folks sort of in the adjacent spaces starting to inch in. And so I get motivated about our opportunity to do some damage in this space. I'm just really excited about what we're building. And so I get motivated by that. I get motivated by the team, which is also why I like the stage that I'm at. I was looking at some larger opportunities, but I like the team building and I like helping people create and develop their own stories. And, at larger companies, maybe you don't have the interpersonal interactions as much with number of people. And so I like the intimacy of the stage that we're at. And I get really motivated by helping people create their own stories. And I think, a place like Qatalog is just an incredible opportunity for people to build a compelling story.
Awesome. Last question. What's your preference for consuming information? Books, blogs, podcasts?
Probably books. It was a game changer for me when I moved over to the Kindle because I've had trouble sleeping. And the Kindle changed my world in terms of just being able to wake up, read a few pages and fall back to sleep. So I devour books when I can. But I read pretty much every morning and every night at this point.
Blue light doesn't get you? Like, are you wearing like blue light glasses like I have my kids wear now at this point because they're on their devices so much?
Well, I wish. I got my wife one of those headbands so she can like listen to podcasts as she's falling asleep.
Yeah, that's right. Amazing, amazing. How can folks get in touch with you to say thank you, perhaps apply for, one of the openings that you have there?
Yeah, definitely. Ryan at Qatalog.com, and that's QATALOG.com. Twitter at Ryan S. Burke, and then my LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Ryan Burke, thank you again for going over quota for the second time.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Goodbye, everyone. Cue in the music.